So, what changes have you noticed in the funeral industry as of lately? It seems like there's kind of a growing trend away from kind of your traditional funeral, where visitation, funeral, burial, and more celebrations of life that are a little bit more uplifting, not as somber.
I think it goes hand in hand with the people's going away from church affiliation too. The people that churches are packed at Christmas and Easter time, and many times the rest of the year they don't have the members that they used to have in the past. I mean, you can tell by some of the churches that have closed and kind of parish that are merging together and things. So it goes hand in hand with people because a big part of the celebration of a funeral service usually is surrounded around a church service and the thoughts of resurrection and the thoughts of the burial and things. And so as people have gotten away from those things too, then of course the funeral side that ties very close with that, of course has to change and bend and be flexible, I guess is the best way of saying it. When a family comes in, we used to be pretty well set. We would know that it would be a visitation certain days and a funeral service and a day after and things like that. And now it's like I said, it's be flexible because you never know what desires the family's going to have.
Yeah. Are there some kind of examples, anecdotes that kind of spring to mind of maybe your more non-traditional, unconventional funeral type arrangement?
Well, the one expression that I really think it's overused, and I hear people say it other things. Well, according to their wishes, or Mom always said that she didn't want to do these things and all that. And you always, in the back of my mind, sometimes I wonder: is it really that your wishes, that Mom's wishes were to not do these things, or is it really that you don't want to deal with some of these things? With going through the traditional type services and dealing with the wake and the funeral and things, and then of course the things that go with that. I'm going to see the clergy and the other planning that surrounds around it. So I do see, you do see, especially some of the younger people today that are looking towards, maybe the celebration of life service, like you mentioned. Where they would do, the music that we have at the funeral home now is one example of it, but I mean, it's a lot more modern. I mean, and when I started 30 years ago, we never would have had a song, Stairway to Heaven or, things like that around the funeral home. That would have been more traditional, funeral music. So, I mean, they're bringing in, more requests in areas like that really do kind of deviate away from what we normally did, Mm-hmm. And it usually seems to surround around cremation for the most part, where people will come and still have us do the paperwork we need to do and do the formalities of things. The cremation takes place whether there's a service or not before that, and then sometimes people will do a week, 2 weeks, a month later have some type of a celebration of the person's life, and do it in where they feel would be an appropriate place, or where that person really had a bonding, type thing with, whether it be Eagle Point Park or whether it be one of the bars downtown. I hate to say, but that's some of the things that people do that too. I kind of cringe when I hear people wanting to do a service at a bar, but it is what it is. It's the way people are celebrating their lives.
Yeah. What are some of the more maybe unusual requests or maybe celebrations that you've seen?
And it's not so much that everybody has their little quirks about things. One of the most unique things I had, there was a young lady who had some cancer issues and she died, but she was into her bling, her rings and her jewelry and things. And she was so precise about things. She brought me 2 rubber gloves in from one of the nurses, and she had one labeled right, one labeled left, and each finger had the ring in that rubber glove that she wanted on her hands, when she would, and she did things, fairly traditional, but she was so precise about that she wanted, this was my pinky ring, and she had everything labeled out, and I saved the gloves. It was so unique and such a great way of doing it and conveying to me how she wanted to be done. It's just people that have all kinds of unique requests, to be buried with their cell phones. God knows how they think they're going to call somebody, but they were so attached to their cell phones anymore that they wanted their phone with them. Golf clubs and putters. We had a service one time where we went to Sacred Heart Church, and of course there's a lot of stairs in the front of Sacred Heart, and the lady had put some golf balls in with her husband, and of course as we went up the stairs, the golf balls rolled to the bottom of the casket. They got loose in there, and they were not in a sleeve. And so then the pallbearers were looking at each other trying to, geez, what's going on here, and of course it wasn't the appropriate place to say anything at the time. And then coming out, of course, we turned the casket and come down the other way, and boom, 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 the balls went down to the other end of the casket. So then when we finally got to the car, I had to explain to the pallbearers, that we had golf balls in the casket because Mom wanted his putter and the golf balls to go with them. Like there's not going to be golf balls in heaven, I guess. But, that was one of the unique things that the reaction was pretty good from the pallbearers and the family,
Yeah. You talked about music and the music changing. Are there other examples you can give in terms of like the type of music being played?
It's more rock and roll. But I have to remember that, it's my age group too, that a lot of these people that are dying, I'm 60, and so, these people that are dying, 60s, 70s years old, that grew up with the Beatles and grew up with the Stones and grew up with things like I did, the Monkees and anything else you want to throw at it, So that's more of the music that they grew up with versus the old ballads and the older, hymns and things that the generation 30 years ago would have been prevalent with, So, it's and there's some songs that I cringe a little bit when they play because it doesn't seem to me to be very appropriate. And there's other ones that if you sit and listen to them, some of the lyrics are appropriate to someone celebrating their life, So it's...
Yeah. And so I guess what are you hearing from families, when in terms of the reasoning for that, what are they saying to you when, they're requesting that type of music or, they're, saying that they want to have a reception or a celebration at a bar or out at Eagle Point?
But the main thing is, like I mentioned earlier, being flexible.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people are uncomfortable with talking about death, and a lot of people just flat put it off on the back burner and ignore it. And then there's other people. The National Funeral Director Association has a big push toward having, and the program is actually called Have the Talk. It's Have the Talk of a Lifetime. And it's basically encouraging people to sit down and do that, to talk with their family, talk with their friends, talk with a funeral director if they choose, and how you would want to be remembered or how you would want to be celebrated. If church is important to you, by all means, you want to incorporate the church into the service. If you were more of a naturalist and more of a nature person, then of course you want to incorporate things that way. The people that we have a great hospice organization here in Dubuque, and I know they will bridge that subject a little bit. They, of course, legally can't plan a funeral, but they sure can visit with families and say, did you talk about these things? When something happens, what would you like? We need to notify someone. Who would you want us to notify and give them some type of heads up what you were thinking of doing. So, they were great about trying to get people to maybe open up a little bit, when they're ending those end of life decisions and things that they need to make. We have the hospice people come out here and go through many times with us what we do here at the funeral home and what happens when someone passes, and so they're pretty much up to speed with how things go with us too, so they do that. And then, like I said, there's all these other things out there, the social media and the things that are out there now online that people can do and make planning with. I know on our website we've got things where people can actually pull up a planning guide and look at it. And in the old days when I started, of course, there was no internet per se and things like that it was something that you physically had to sit down and talk with things with the funeral director and get things planned out and where the church would be and where the cemetery was going to be and what they wanted for flowers and merchandise and caskets and that. And it's there's so much more openness and more availabilities, for people online now that they can, sit down and do this in their living room at midnight. If they can't sleep some night, they can pull it up and plan their funeral out if they want, or at least give someone some indication as to what they would want done.